There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't show up on any test. It doesn't get you into honor societies or earn you a plaque. In fact, most people who have it spent years, sometimes decades, not recognizing it as intelligence at all. They called it anxiety, they called it being too sensitive, they called it trust issues, or overthinking, or the inability to just relax and let things go like normal people seem to do so effortlessly. But here's what nobody told them. What nobody told you, maybe. The hypervigilance, the pattern recognition, the emotional depth, the capacity to read a room in seconds, the way you can anticipate outcomes before they arrive. None of that appeared out of nowhere. It was built, forged actually, in the specific fire of difficult experience. This is what some researchers and clinicians are beginning to call traumatic intelligence, and it might be the most misunderstood form of smart that exists. Let me be honest about what this is and what it isn't, because the word trauma gets used carelessly and I don't want to do that here. Traumatic intelligence isn't a diagnosis. It's not a badge of suffering. It's a recognition grounded in neuroscience, psychology, and the lived experience of millions of people. That certain kinds of adversity, when survived and processed, produce a specific constellation of cognitive and emotional capacities that are genuinely extraordinary, not in spite of the difficulty, because of it. So let's talk about the signs. Not as a checklist to complete, but as a mirror. One that might finally reflect something you've always sensed about yourself but never had the language for. The first thing you might recognize is an almost supernatural ability to read people. Not just their mood, but their motivations, their contradictions, the gap between what they're saying and what they actually mean. This skill didn't come from a book. It came from necessity. When you grew up in an environment or moved through experiences where misreading someone had real consequences, your brain adapted. It became a social and emotional scanner, running continuous background analysis on faces, tones, silences, microexpressions. What looks like intuition from the outside is actually a highly trained perceptual system. Polyvagal theory, developed by neuroscientist Stephen Porges, describes this as neuroception, the nervous system's ability to detect safety or threat in the environment below the level of conscious awareness. In people with significant early adversity, this system gets exquisitely calibrated. The cost is hypervigilance. The gift is a depth of social intelligence most people will never develop. The second thing is that you understand people, genuinely, deeply understand them, in ways that sometimes unsettle you. You can feel the pain behind someone's cruelty. You can trace the fear inside someone's anger. You can see the wound underneath the behavior. This is empathy, yes, but it's empathy with forensic depth. Research on post-traumatic growth, a framework developed by psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, consistently identifies a profound deepening of relational capacity as one of the central outcomes in people who have moved through and processed significant hardship. You don't just feel with people, you understand the architecture of their inner world. That is genuinely rare. Third, you have a relationship with nuance that most people find uncomfortable. You live in gray areas, you resist simple narratives. When everyone around you is confidently sorting people into heroes and villains, you're the one quietly noting that it's more complicated than that. And you're almost always right. Trauma teaches you that people contain multitudes, that circumstances shape behavior, that nothing is quite as clean as the consensus wants it to be. What looks like an inability to take a side is actually a sophisticated epistemological humility ankiti, a hard-won resistance to the false comfort of oversimplification. Fourth, and this one might sting a little, you are extraordinarily skilled at managing crisis. When things fall apart, when the emergency arrives and everyone else is scrambling, you often find that you go very calm, focused, almost eerily functional. People around you marvel at this. What they don't always see is the cost of it, that you've run drills for this your whole life. Your nervous system knows how to regulate under pressure because it's had to. The body keeps a score, as psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk put it, and in this case, the score is a hard-won capacity for composure under fire that most people simply haven't been required to develop. Fifth is the one that gets people into therapy, often for years before they recognize it as a sign of intelligence rather than a problem. Your nervous system anticipates. You feel the future before it happens. You walk into a room and you already know something is off. You sense a relationship changing before any visible evidence. You can feel the shape of a bad outcome building from miles away. This is anticipatory processing at a high level. pattern recognition so finely calibrated that the signal arrives well before anyone else has registered the stimulus. It gets called anxiety. Sometimes it is anxiety, but embedded inside the anxiety, for many people, is a perceptual accuracy that deserves far more respect than it gets. Sixth, you have a philosophical depth that feels almost involuntary. Questions about meaning, mortality, identity, the nature of suffering, these aren't abstract to you. You've lived adjacent to the large questions. And that proximity changed how your mind works. It stripped away a certain comfortable shallowness that people who have not been tested often carry without knowing it. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, a phrase so overused it's lost most of its meaning. But the deeper version of that insight is this: what tests us most severely forces us to develop a relationship with existence that goes to the bone. Traumatic intelligence is, among other things, an earned philosophical depth. Seventh, you are a builder of meaning. One of the most consistent findings in the post-traumatic growth literature is a heightened capacity for finding meaning in suffering, in relationships, in small moments, in the fact of being alive at all. People with traumatic intelligence often have a profound appreciation for things others take for granted because they have, at some point, known their absence. Viktor Frankl, writing from the most extreme possible context in man's search for meaning, articulated this with unforgettable clarity. The last of the human freedoms is the ability to choose one's response to any given set of circumstances. People who have had to exercise that freedom under duress develop it into a genuine and powerful capacity. Eighth, you have an unusual tolerance for emotional complexity and pain. You don't need every feeling to be resolved. You can sit with grief, ambiguity, tension, uncertainty, and without immediately reaching for a way out. This might not sound like intelligence, but it is. The psychological term is distress tolerance, and research consistently links it to more adaptive long-term functioning, better decision-making, and deeper relationships. You developed it because you had to, and it makes you one of the most emotionally capable people in almost any room you enter. Ninth, you are profoundly loyal, but selectively so, because you know what betrayal costs, not theoretically, but in your body, your trust, your sense of the world. Your loyalty, when given, is real and rare and extraordinarily deep, and your discernment about who earns it has been sharpened by experience. This looks like difficulty trusting. Sometimes it is difficulty trusting, but underneath the caution is a quality of commitment that, once activated, is among the most powerful relational forces a human being can offer. And 10th, the one that quietly underpins all the others. You know yourself, not perfectly, not without blind spots, but you have been forced into an intimate relationship with your own interior landscape. You know your triggers and their history. You know the shape of your fear. You know the specific contours of your wound, and if you've done any work on it, you know the beginning of your healing. This self-knowledge is not navel-gazing. It is a navigational instrument, and people who possess it, who have earned it the hard way, move through the world with a depth of self-understanding that most comfortable lives never require and never develop. Here is what I want to leave you with. Traumatic intelligence is not a consolation prize for suffering. It is not the universe's awkward attempt to balance the ledger. It is the real, documented, psychologically substantiated result of a nervous system and a mind that were pushed to their limits and adapted. The cost was real. The pain was real. None of that gets erased or minimized by naming the intelligence it produced. Both things are true at once. But if you've spent years seeing your depth as damage, your vigilance as disorder, your sensitivity as weakness, I want you to consider that the story you've been told about yourself might be incomplete. Because what you're carrying is not just the weight of what happened to you, it's also the capacity that grew around it. And that capacity is not small. It is, in fact, extraordinary. If you recognize yourself in any of this, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment. Tell me which of these landed most. And if this kind of deep dive into the psychology of how we become who we are is something you want more of, stick around. We're going somewhere real.